Welcome, listeners, to www.ironradio.org, the website and podcast for all things strength sports and sports nutrition. Thanks for listening.
Good morning, everybody. It's another episode of Iron Radio. This is Phil Stevens. I am a strength coach, Highland Games athlete, power lifter, youth sport coach, and maker of all kinds of stuff.
Cool. And this is Lonnie Lowry. I'm a bodybuilder, former competitive bodybuilder, about 25 years, and a prof at the same time. I was a professor in exercise physiology and nutrition. The two kind of went together. Personal and professional interest. Actually, I am in Indianapolis this weekend. I know some of our listeners know that I'm interested in like Dungeons and Dragons and stuff. I'm at this conference, and man, just walking around, people are. I really think it's worse than the Gen Pop, but I see a lot of intractable obesity, like people kicking their bellies with their knees. You know, I'm like, wow.
Yep.
And not all. I mean, there's some fit people here. I'm not saying that that's the case. But.
No, it's the percentage of the population, though, is the difference.
Yeah. It's when you plunge yourself amongst the Gen Pop or even some of these subcultures, it's like, ooh, man.
Yep.
You just feel.
Yep.
All right. I have a bunch of mail and listener news, so I thought what we could do is just get your response to each thing, Phil. Everybody's me and Phil. And then, Phil wanted to bring up some news about strength coaching as a career, which we were already talking about.
Yeah.
Let me just fire some of this. This is from the American Society of Nutrition. It's one of my groups.
Strength and muscle sport news.
The ASN Nutrition Policy Bulletin. This really kind of feeds off what I was just saying. Nearly 1.8 billion, with a B, adults globally at risk of disease from inadequate physical activity. Nearly 1/3, 31% of adults worldwide, approximately 1.8 billion people, did not meet the recommended levels of physical activity in 2022. Physical inactivity among adults increased 5% between 2010 and 2022. So since we've been doing this show, there's been 5% more of the world population become inactive. So Iron Radio is not saving the world.
Yeah.
It says the highest rates of physical inactivity were observed in high-income Asia-Pacific region. Remember, this is global. And South Asia. Physical inactivity was more common globally among women compared with men. And I'd heard that before, too. I believe that's also true in the U.S. Lots of reasons for that, I think, globally. The study was conducted by researchers from the WHO together with academic colleagues and published in Lancet Global Health Journal, so top-tier journal. Actually, that's going to go with our topic of the day later in the show, too, I think, is there's a real need to get people moving and do it well because the human body needs to move. You know, in nutrition, we talk about deficiencies, right? You don't get enough vitamin C, you develop scurvy. Well, if you don't do enough physical activity, I think to the human body, that's a deficiency disease, right? And you fall apart. So, I don't know, any thoughts on that? Global inactivity?
I mean, it's staring us in the face. It's part of, it's just our daily lives now. I mean, the average daily life is just like everything that's come about in modern times has been amazing, but yeah, it's led to that. I mean, every new invention leads to us being more and more inactive. I mean, you've got, from simple things, you've got little robots that sweep your floor constantly. You know, little daily life things. And I honestly thinking about it, and I was having a conversation with other strength coaches, my wife, and like the biggest thing that changes as we get older, like I'm approaching 50, and I'm staring in my face like I am just generally less active than I was at, say, 30.
Yeah.
Like just the shit you do. And that's what adds up. And I was telling my wife, I was like, that's the reason. It's like, I just eat less now. I'm not as generally active, even though I purposely try and stay active. I mean, I cut my own wood and things like that, but it's just that general activity goes way down as you age. And you combat, or you couple that with, you know, cell phones and gadgets and things that do work for you. And yeah, we're on a downward spiral. I mean, we have to seek out daily life purposely.
Right. You know, I just bought a leaf blower and I thought I should just sweep.
Yeah.
You know, like
Yeah.
as much as I can, or rake as much as I can.
No, and that's I purposely do. Like I have a wood splitter, but I don't use it. Like I've made a pact with myself. It's like I'm gonna split this shit by hand until I can't. You
Yeah.
know?
No, I hear
And
you.
it's just something I try to do for myself, and that's I always try and preach it to people. It's like the tool that you need to keep the sharpest is you. Like everybody worries about their gadgets, but they don't work on themselves. And like if it came down to it, I'm not saying it's going to, but like man, if the world ever goes to hell, we're in trouble. You know?
Oh, it's
If all
true.
of a sudden the grid's just down, we're gonna have a population of people that are just like, uh-oh, you
Yeah.
know.
Well,
So
it's seductive because there are things you can do, like with a leaf blower, that I can't do
yeah,
with a rake, or I've talked before on the show about my hand clippers.
yep,
It takes much longer. I'll still do it as much as I can.
yeah,
But yeah, but sometimes it's seductive when the gadget, it just does it faster and almost better.
yep.
And it's like, yeah, but I'm going to tolerate doing this 80% as well and
Hmm.
twice as long just because it's me. I have the
Yeah,
steering wheel a little bit
yep,
more.
yeah. And that's
Yeah.
tough though. I mean, it's you have to have a broader outlook on life, and like that's like my wood splitter. Like I could get things done probably 15% faster, maybe,
Hmm.
but at what cost to me? You know. And
Yeah.
I I like physical activity. It's enjoyment too. Like I genuinely like doing that stuff, and I know it makes me feel better after. And I'm smart enough to know that it's just better for me. So I
Yeah.
have to have that broad outlook on life.
What you said about doing less so you eat less. I do that too. Like I was just saying to my wife, I'm like, I don't lift 5 and 6 days a week like I used to. I
Yeah,
can't
yeah.
eat a Wendy's triple.
No, yeah,
I get a Wendy's single now, burger,
yep,
for you people that aren't in the US. Uh,
yep.
I just can't do it. But you also don't want to become like the overall metabolic flux seems to decrease, right? You do less, so you eat less, and then you're a little
Mhm.
weaker and smaller, and you can't let that go too far, man. You
No,
know,
yeah, that's the problem. You got to keep doing things, and yeah, but I mean, and then there's the problem in and of itself, and that's what I talk about here in the Midwest a lot. Like when I flew back to the country, uh, when I lived in Thailand for a year, and the further I flew into the country, the fatter it got, and
right, right,
a lot of that is to do with like the culture, like where I'm at now, smack dab in the middle of the country was farming country, and now it still is, but it's not. You know, like at one point in time, I'd say 90% of the population here was in farming, and now 90% of the land is, but it's all mechanized. But you have all these kids growing up in that like this is how Grandpa ate, and like they're doing a tenth of the activity, but they still have the eating habits. Like it changed so fast. You know, they're eating like their family always did, but they're doing a tenth of the work,
right.
and we got a fat population, you know, and you
Well,
have to recognize that in yourself. Like I'm lucky I recognize it. It's like, oh man, I'm doing less. I'm not hungry. I'm gonna eat less.
yeah, what I remember growing up, like up before the crack of dawn, you probably
Yeah,
put in 2 or 3 hours of pretty hard manual work. No wonder you could come back to giant plate of sausage gravy and
yeah,
biscuits.
yeah, exactly. And now their tractors drive themselves. They don't have to steer the wheel. I got into a freaking combine and like it's all GPS activated.
Right.
And they're just like, we're just sitting in here to make sure nothing goes wrong. They just sit back and watch their phones and let the machine run itself. The world and the advent of new things has exasperated the issue.
Since you just brought up farming, and I have a piece on that, I'm going to rearrange my little notes here. Check this out. And people might have different responses to this. I have mixed thoughts, but we've talked about this on the show before. Bill introduced to ban the use of federal funds for cell cultured meat. Representative Warren Davidson, Republican from Ohio, introduced the Real Meat Act of 2024, which would prohibit federal funding for research, development, promotion, or advertisement of cell cultured meat. It also would prohibit using federal nutrition funds for the purchase of cell cultured meat, including SNAP funds, right? So what we used to call food stamps. A similar bill was introduced in the Senate last year. So I went and pulled a little bit more from this, from the press release itself. It says, Representative Warren Davidson, Republican, Ohio, introduced the Real Meat Act of 2024 today alongside 8 other House colleagues. The legislation prohibits federal funding from being obligated or expended for the use of research, and that's where I don't like it, for the use of research, production, or advancement of cell-cultured meat. Here's a quote that I just disagree with. Fake cell-cultured meat not only poses a health risk to the human body, but it also threatens the livelihoods of Americans' hardworking ranchers, livestock farmers, and butchers. Recently, laws prohibiting lab-grown meat have been passed in states like Florida and Alabama. So I am against this. I just spoke with someone, and I'm going to withhold the name, but an academic powerhouse, and they are part of a consortium of cell-grown meat. And she's like, what we want to do is put like 10% of cell-grown meat into existing like ground meat products. You know, it could be chicken nuggets, it could be burger.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense to me. When we go to the gas station, you know, your gas is like 10% ethanol. They just kind of put some in to reduce cost. I like the idea cell-grown meat would reduce animal suffering, you know, environmental issues, all the kinds of things that go with ranching. At the same time, I'm not some anti-meat dude, you know, or anti-rancher or anything like that. But I'm going to guess that these guys, these congressmen, are funded by like the National Cattlemen's Association or something like that.
Yeah.
And they're just doing their bidding, right? Because that's money in politics here in the States that seems to control people's opinions. But yeah, so you mentioned farming, and this would be a threat to farming, right? The more cell-grown meat, the less, farmers and butchers, I suppose. You know, we would have to change to a new business model, right? It's just like when VHS tapes were no longer made. It's not like people didn't just retool to the new technology, right? So maybe instead of growing up a regular type butcher, sure, you might have like the artisan butchers, but maybe you work in a meat plant in a different way, you know, like a cell-cultured meat plant. But I don't like the idea that they want to try to blunt progress, including research, it sounds like. But what are your thoughts on this? Like these laws that are attempted to stop cell-cultured meat. Is that a good idea?
Man, I can understand it in ways, but like you said, there's arguments for it and there's arguments against it. I am definitely one of those people that's not against technological advancement in all fields. It's not all good, but it's not all bad. You know, like you can't argue that. Like, is there ways that our medical industry has gone bad over the years with technical advancement? Yes, but there's lots of ways it's gone good. And for every Tylenol out there, there's something else that actually works, you know, and it's not as bad.
Right. That's toxic.
So, but it's being smart enough to like point it out. But no, that's how I was going to mention. Florida became the first state to ban it, and I know, like, of course, Kansas ranchers and farmers are amazing. They're happy with that, and because it's saving their lifestyles. But and then you couple that with the big push from governments and things like that to try and do away with meat. Like you saw the thing, they're like serving mainly vegan options to the Olympians this year, and they're all like they're having to go find their own food. You know, like they go to the village and they're like, "There's nothing for me to eat here. It's all vegan options. We're athletes." Anyway, a bit off topic, but like you said, I mean, I don't mind. I'd eat lab-grown meat. I mean, I'd try it. Now, if it doesn't taste as good, then whatever. But or if it's less nutrient dense, and that's the only thing that I'd worry about is, like we've talked about it. I mean, it's like red meat is like a powerhouse of micro and macronutrients that beyond what most other foods are. It's like, are they going to be able to do that same thing just by fortifying lab-grown meat and things like that? So
I feel like this quote, who I think is from the congressman, about fake cell-cultured meat, that already sounds like a politician, right? Fake poses health risks. And I don't think that's an accurate statement, but, you know, whatever. The truth is, agriculture, if it supports 95 or 99% of all human populations on this planet, with climate change and everything else, we better have a backup. The scientists, the agricultural scientists are trying to give us, use technology to have a backup plan, at the very least, a backup plan, or I like that comment that I heard from that industry scientist. Well, she's an academic scientist, but about like, why don't we just put in like 10% of the meat as these things? I don't consider that adulterated. I don't think it's nutritionally worse. I don't think it poses health risks. I've never seen any data that it would pose health risks. It's just an alternative model. Yeah, it's going to throw vegans into a tailspin because if they're doing it for ethical reasons, there's no animal now.
Yeah, there's no animal anymore. Yeah.
And I know we've talked about it. So,
I mean, it's a real thing. We have to think about the population as a whole. There are how many people now? Like 1,000 years ago, it was easy to raise enough animals.
That's right.
And now we've got 80 billion people, and that's going to be ever growing, most likely. It's like we have to think about ways to feed the population. But my worry is, okay, how much is this lab-grown meat going to cost? Is it actually going to be more cost-effective? Or is it going to be even more expensive? So...
Right now, it's more, right?
Yeah.
But once they scale up the industry, if these politicians will let them, like I said, this just reeks to me of money in politics.
Yeah.
They want to go back to the old ways, and I'm not against the old ways, but I feel like there's got to be some compromise, as we move forward to allow this to develop, because we might be leaning on this more than we want when droughts and all kinds of weird stuff, hit.
Yeah.
Okay. Next up, this is something I kept seeing in just around the internet. Life expectancy versus healthcare expenditure. This isn't just for lifters, although obviously if you're physically active, it's a big deal. But this is an infographic that was floating around, and I'll have to go find the reference for it. But basically it talks about countries and how much they spend per capita on healthcare and what they get out of it in life expectancy. So I just want everybody to know how bad we have it here in the US. Like, I'm actually a fan, and I know a lot of people have different ideas about this, but some type of public health care model that's more accessible, more affordable than it is, because we have these criminal middlemen, in my opinion, that get between you and your doctor, and they want the biggest cut. Anyway, if you look around the globe, health expenditure per capita is $2,000 to $5,000. And then you get like 84 years of life expectancy out of that. I'm talking about Japan, Spain, South Korea, Australia, France, Ireland, Canada, the UK, Finland, New Zealand, like most modern industrialized countries. In the US, it's not 2,000 to 5,000. We spend 10,000 per capita for 5 years less. No, more than that. More than 5 years, it looks like maybe around 78 years or so of life expectancy for twice the spending. So we suck at that. Our insurance private model, where they tie your employment to a specific, like I said, like mafia middleman insurance company, the rest of the world, I think, laughs at us. And unfortunately, and I know that we'll get to this in the topic of the day, but unfortunately, we have a reactive healthcare model. We shouldn't be spending this much money and wait for the person to have the heart attack or the stroke or some kind of blowout or disease. We should be spending more money on the prevention side so they don't get broken and they don't need fixed with expensive care.
A lot of that's just education. No, that's a tough one, man. It's tough. And like we've broached this subject a bit, but because then there's like, okay, let's go with a uniform healthcare model where everybody gets, but the problem with that is like, what about those people that just do want to sit on their couch and be fat? Like, why should they get the same care that I get? Like, and I keep myself in shape, Like, that's the tough part, is like you have a large percentage of the population that just doesn't give a shit what shape they're in. Like I know plenty of people that have very curable ailments, lifestyle ailments, that just, they want nothing to do with any personal responsibility on them. Just give me another pill.
I think that's the key. Personal
that's tough. And how do you enforce personal responsibility?
Yeah.
So
yeah. I'm actually a fan. I know a lot of people have different opinions, but I'm actually a fan of like a Medicare for all model. But yeah, there has to be some way to roll this out in a fair way. Because what did I just say? I'm walking around looking at these people with, they weigh 700 pounds. Or like they're in wheelchairs and they have intractable obesity. They're kicking their bellies walking around. And
Yeah.
that takes a lot of abuse of the system,
Yeah.
I would think. I mean, people have different reasons for being really obese. I get it. And, there's lots of issues. But yeah, how do you zero in on personal responsibility? Because if someone just wants to literally indulge, I used to tell my wife when we were driving around down in Columbus when I was working the corporate position down there, I'd look down out of my truck, because I could look down into cars more easily, and people are just shoveling fries and burgers in their face, and they're obese and they're driving around, and I'm just thinking, see, now I would like to do that sometimes.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't get to do that because I'm taking some personal responsibility. I'm not just indulging like that. And then they complain, oh, I don't get, it's not fair, whatever your excuse is. But it's like, but look what you're doing, bro.
Yeah.
So.
And that's what most people don't get. And that's the tough part. And I can see the argument on both sides. Like, do I wish we had some kind of universal health care? Yes, but I also wish people took some responsibility for themselves. Because a lot of our issues right now are self-induced. Like, put the fucking ho-ho down and move a little more. And people just won't do that. And that's the part I tackle with is like, why should somebody get the same level of care I get when they just don't care? And they're going to need 4 times the care because of their choices.
But then there are the flip side of that, and I think is the bigger wrong, are people like you or I, which we do try to eat like an adult, but when we have a blowout, a hip, my ankle, then we can't afford it and we lose our house. That's not cool. And in other countries, I don't think they get that. Like, you have a major medical setback, you can lose your house. You could go bankrupt. Medical bankruptcies, I think, are the #1 cause of bankruptcies in this country, and that is messed up.
Yep.
That is messed up.
Yeah. So it's a tough situation. So
okay. Anyway, that infographic was floating around about how much money we spend here. I know people talk about the Great American Experiment. Of course, the answer is for people just to get some education on how to lift properly. Everybody should lift. How about that? Lift weights, people. Okay. A couple more. This is interesting. It kind of fits. This is a lot of theme. This is also about sedentary lifestyles. Listen to this. Coffee makes sedentary lifestyle less deadly. The association of daily sitting time and coffee consumption with the risk of all-cause and cardiovascular disease specifically among U.S. adults. It says Chinese epidemiologists. So again, not cause and effect. When you hear epidemiology, right, big population-based associations, just so I know our listeners know this, but Chinese epidemiologists published a study in BMC Public Health in which they analyzed data from 10,639 American adults. They collected in the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey. People are probably familiar, NHANES. I always describe this very loosely as it's like the Google trucks driving around mapping America, except they drive around and they take your pulse and your blood sugar and stuff like that. Yeah. Maybe get diet records. Researchers determined whether coffee influenced the effects of sitting on the risk of death. After the researchers had removed other lifestyle factors, because they can do that mathematically, like only look among people with a certain activity level or smoking status or alcohol or sleep. After they had removed other lifestyle factors, they saw that drinking coffee reduced the risk of death. The more coffee the study participants drank, the smaller the risk of death. And it says, of course, not surprisingly, a sedentary lifestyle by itself, when they look at it alone, had the opposite effect. The more sedentary, higher cause of death, right? So it says active substances. There are too many different substances in coffee for that. And, that's something I've been looking at for publishing on the last couple of years. I mean, hundreds of compounds in coffee. Caffeine has some benefits, of course. So does chlorogenic acid or trigonylene, or, there's a lot of antioxidants and things like that. I pulled the paper itself. It's ZHOU and colleagues, Zhu and colleagues, just to give you the kind of the nitty gritty. It says, among the 10,639 participants in the study cohort, there were 945 deaths, 284 of whom died of cardiovascular disease during the follow-up period of 13 years. Multivariable models showed that sitting more than 8 hours per day man, that's rough. But cubicle
Mhm.
jobs, I was kind of in
Yeah.
that world, was associated with higher risk of all cause and cardiovascular death. So hazard ratio for all cause 1.46, and for cardiovascular 1.79. So way over 1.00 compared to those that sat less than 4 hours per day. Now here's the neat thing. Notably, joint analysis firstly showed that non-coffee drinkers who sat 6 hours or more per day had a 1.58 hazards ratio, but this was not true among those who had coffee intake. And again, sort of more coffee, the better, up to a point. So obviously,
Yeah.
coffee isn't just one thing. People drink crappy sugar bomb coffees. They drink bad coffee. And you can also have the fresh stuff like I drink, black coffee, basically,
Mhm.
fresh ground beans if you can. Then you get all those phenolic compounds, minerals, anti-inflammatory effect, etc. So it is kind of funny, isn't it, that this American way
Mhm.
of sedentary but pour coffee on it to perform. It's almost like coffee is an accidental crutch or a corrective measure, you know, in all of this stuff. So
Well, you drink some coffee, it's hard to just sit there. You know,
it's hard to sit there.
it just, yeah, it's hard to just, you start bouncing a knee and things like that. I mean, so, you want to get up and move, but makes sense.
If listeners, if you're interested, like when you look at the literature, we had to actually determine a dose. And it's really hard, right? Because there's, depending on the roast of the bean and the brew method and so many other things, like what's the dose of chlorogenic acid, or what's the dose of trigonylene, or whatever you're looking at, or even caffeine. But we kind of settled on 4 cups a day. So that's a reasonable amount. It's sort of a moderate intake, I think. I'm sitting here in a hotel with these little 8-ounce paper cups. This is not a cup
Mhm.
of coffee to
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
So there's that. Yeah, yay coffee. I have 2 more, and then we can have our the topical discussion, which is on point with all this. I wanted to make a note. Dave Fryer is one of our super listeners. He sent me some stuff. I'm following up with him. One of the things that he was talking about, though, was the risk of, well, the way he put it, semaglutide, and whether it makes you blind or it hurts your
Mm.
vision. So I pulled up a paper for Dave, American Academy of Ophthalmology. They address this issue because it does affect your vision. But I wanted people to know why. So this was by Vered Hazanchuk, and it was reviewed by a medical doctor. But let me just give you the bottom line. This is a public-facing news bit, so they kind of dumbed it down, I guess. The diabetes drug semaglutide has been making headline news ever since the medication got FDA approval. We're talking about all these semaglutide meds, Ozempic, Wegovy,
Mhm.
Rybelsus. Studies show semaglutide can significantly help people control their blood sugar, and that's part of the key. Okay. It says when the body experiences a change in sugar level, it can affect the shape of the eye's lens. This change is what causes the blurry vision, a side effect of semaglutide. Older patients, and you're just talking about pushing 50. I mean, I'm 55 now.
Mhm.
Older patients are more likely to experience the blurred vision when beginning the medication, said retina specialist Raj Maturi, a medical doctor. This is because the eye's lens becomes less flexible as we age, so vision takes longer to stabilize when the body experiences these changes in blood sugar. The good news is this is a temporary side effect, usually subsiding after 3 to 4 months. So that was from, again, the American Academy of Ophthalmologists. Now, I'm not going to get into what this does to the usual retinopathy that diabetics have, or other
Mhm.
things like that. So disclaimer, people, talk to your doctor. But it is interesting. Yeah, people are so excited. Oh my God, I just dropped 20 or 30 pounds. And then later you start seeing some of these news clips around. Now, I do think doctors have known about this, and scientists, this blood sugar lens relationship or some of these vision symptoms for a while. So it does make sense to me, though, if you get your blood sugar changing, which is what these drugs do, and that affects the lens of your eye, then and if it's temporary, it just interesting. So I don't know what Dave was pointing to. He probably sent me some hardcore, just knowing some of our listeners, hardcore scientific journal. But this is just
Mhm.
facing stuff about it. So
as far as that topic goes, one of the things I've been waiting on is with all the semaglutide stuff is like, are bodybuilders going to use this? Because they'll use anything.
Mm-hmm.
And I just this week saw my first thing come out. They interviewed a bodybuilder. They did that old school thing where they like blank out their face and hide their voice. And because he was just openly a professional bodybuilder and talking about the use of PEDs and then also the use of like the semaglutide stuff. And he was just damning it in the bodybuilding world. He's like, the bodybuilders are starting to figure out like not to use it. And that's one thing I was wondering about with like the semaglutide and the Wegovy and things like that is like, can we combat those bad side effects? Will they be able to combat the bad side effects with anabolics? And his big thing was like, no. He said they've been trying it. He said bodybuilders are now staying away from it because the amount of lean muscle tissue you're losing, even with anabolics, is too high. They're trying it and said it's not, basically the anabolics are not combating the bad side effects. He said they're losing like 50% muscle. He said, which is unacceptable.
Yeah.
They're steering away from it. Even the bodybuilders who will, I mean, you're talking about a population that will take anything.
Oh yeah.
You know? So I mean, you're talking DNP and things like that. Like you're just cooked like an oven. You know, but so that was interesting to me. It's like it was non-scientific, but like we talked about, usually the people on the streets are ahead of the science in ways.
Right. Well, yeah. So, I mean, how long is it going to take, if ever, for scientists to stack androgens with Wegovy? They're not going to do it until they stumble. They might stumble across some older guy who's on TRT and then say, "Oh, look, he's still lost all this muscle." But that's the concern, I think, in the food industry. And I do know some people in that industry that, when you don't eat, you lose a bunch of muscle. But that's shocking to me that even androgens, you can't, you're taking tren and you still lose muscle, man.
Yeah.
Might be less, but that's crazy stuff that you're
interesting. And, so yeah, I mean, it's another one of those things, man. The magic pills, everybody always wants one, but sometimes it's not worth it. You know?
Yeah.
So,
well, like you said, bodybuilders and their willingness to guinea pig themselves and stack polypharmacy kinds of solutions.
Yeah.
If they're stepping back from it, you might want to give that a second thought.
Yeah. So.
Okay, I have one last thing before break. This is from Rocker75 Metalhead. He was asking about or commenting really about an energy drink. The info on Cognizin, because we were talking about being at the ISSN conference and they were giving out T-shirts and there was some different talks on CDP choline, citicholine. It says the info on Cognizin is very interesting to me. I had noticed a few months ago that the energy drink C4 gives me razor focus without jitters. Finding out that they utilize Cognizin gave me a possible reason. I also think the green coffee bean extract they use for the caffeine may cause me fewer jitters. I bought some C4 energy drink packets to use when I travel, and that is working quite well. Love the show, WB. So I appreciate that, my man. The truth is, my wife and I were just talking about some of the different energy drinks, because when we hit the road, we'll grab an energy drink. And we got some of that Rockstar Focus. It's supposed to have the lion's mane. And I tried to find how much lion's mane was in there. I think we talked about this the other week on the show. I can't. It's probably a minuscule amount, because a lot of studies would suggest up to a gram, depending on how you take it. But I think a lot of these energy drinks. One of the things I wanted to do for ages is a study where you did like a mood state questionnaire. And you take some measurements like HRV and other measurements and look at how these different stacks or different stimulants work. What do they do? Because we all know, I remember the first time I drank a big Monster, my wife and I were at all night like drive-in movie. And we looked at each other, we're like, this is not just caffeine. Like you're getting this sensation. So I'm very curious to see how these different things work. There is some data behind CDP choline, citicholine, and it is a drug in Japan. I think we were talking about a few weeks ago. So it's interesting feedback to hear that stuff. I think they might use enough citicoline. I'd have to look at the different individual products. The green coffee extract, I'm doubting there's enough other good stuff other than just using that as a source of caffeine.
Mm-hmm.
But who knows? Do you consume energy drinks, Phil, or do you have a brand preference?
I usually have one every Saturday before my heavy squat and deadlift days, and that's it. I try and limit it to that. The only thing I go in and I grab one of the ones that's not carbonated because I just found out that it just works better for me. If I slam a frickin' Rockstar that's carbonated right before I squat, I'm frickin' burping and stuff. So there's several of them out there that aren't carbonated. That's the only thing I look for.
Okay.
Other than that,
Okay.
and that's just personal preference. Yeah, that's the one day, and that's the only day I try and highly caffeinate. It's like an event day to me, you know.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
So my other days, it's like I need it. I'm not gonna go in and slam a frickin' Rockstar to go bench and do some kickbacks and things like that. It's like I make myself go through that day. But yeah, so
That's funny. You're lumping benching with kickbacks.
So
Yeah. No, I hear you. Like squat day, or yeah, I know. You got
just
it.
different, you know.
Yourself into it. Yeah. The risk is when, like, I've seen students walk around with one of these mega size cans, like all day long. Like every time I see them, like hallway or something at a university, I'm like, you're constantly just, I don't know if you're blunting your system, or that can't be good. Just put it down until you need it.
Yep. Yeah, I reserve it for times I need it. And I figured, and do I have evidence that? No, but I mean, like you said, it's just me thinking that way. Like if I drink these all the time, I want it to work. You know what I'm saying? I don't want to have 3 of them.
Right. Yeah. No, right.
So,
Absolutely.
But
All right, let's go to break. Afterwards, we'll talk about strength coaches. You said it's a growing profession.
yeah, yep.
Hey everybody, Iron Radio is back, and in an expanded way. What can you expect? Well, first, you can get it simulcast every week on the nutritionradio.org network, as well as on the original podcast. It'll appear regularly on iTunes, Spotify, and all your favorite podcasting sites. We have a new Iron Radio / Nutrition Radio Facebook page as well. Please check us out. We're even backed up on YouTube. We hope that an expanded presence will get you the news, education, banter, and guests that's made Iron Radio's community so loyal from the start. You are appreciated.
Okay, we're back. And you know what I want to talk about? I brought it up before the show with Lonnie, and I was just poking around this morning, and I stumbled across. I always search like what's new in strength and conditioning and things like that. And one of the things that popped up is there was a study that came out that measured like the growth of all different career fields. And interestingly enough, the top number one above all of the fields in projected growth from now until 2028 was strength and conditioning professionals. And they're projected at 13% growth until 2028. And part of that was due to the coronavirus pandemic and things like that brought it to light. And it's like we talked about earlier in the show. It's like we're seeing more. We're in a day and age where daily life physical activity almost needs to be prescribed to people. And they're starting to see that. And so you're seeing an influx of strength and conditioning professionals into daily life because people are needing just to be prescribed, like, you need to move. So they've projected. The bad thing is the projected income is still way low. Not just it's like $34,000 a year is the median income of a strength and conditioning professional. The other interesting thing was the median age of a strength and conditioning professional was the average age was 40, in their 40s is where they're at. So you've got an aging population that's heading up that field, but it's also a growing field. But part of me is like, that's not bad because, you know, I'm going to trust the dude that's been in it for 25 years more than I'm going to trust the kid that went and took a weekend course, you know? So, you know, there's a little give and take there. But like we said, I think part of it's because the income part of it is Like there is no governing body, and we've talked about this
Right.
for a
That's
lot.
it.
And
Yes, we have.
like I've given up all my certifications, and it's not that I'm against them. I just wish there was some kind of central governing body that you could trust. You know, they all have an agenda. You look at all the different ones, and there's an
Yes,
agenda.
they
And
do.
like I don't fully agree with any of them. You know, and could we ever get to a point where there is one that we fully agree with? I don't know, but I mean, there are big parts of me that wish it was a registered field. I think it would lend it more credibility and things like that. If at least we could come to terms and just create a generalized council or something over it, but it'd be hard to do. So
Yeah, this happens both on the like the consumer level, the people trying to get the certifications, because we have a wild west, I think, in fitness. It's not like nutrition, which I always thought was bizarre. Part of the reasons that I did nutrition and I got a license to practice is because there's a single license, just like there's a one way to be a dentist, right? You don't just certify each other in being a dentist. Bad
yeah,
things would happen.
yes,
So nutrition is like that, but exercise physiology is not, which is absolutely bizarre. And then there's on the college level, there's this big rush amongst competitors to accredit programs. Like you're only legitimate, your college degree is only legitimate if you are approved by us, and whether it's KHEP or ACEP or there's different groups, NSCA, right? They all have their own opinion. And I'm with you, Phil. Like once you've done it for a long time, I don't know how you reach age 50 or hell 40 and not start rolling your eyes at some of the commercial influences and all this stuff. Because I don't agree with everything either. I'm retiring my dietetics license because, why? I'm kind of overqualified to do that because I have a doctorate and I have too much experience and, I can't really take a job as a regular dietitian anyway. So, I think you come to the point you're like, I remember once a student in the classroom asked when you guest spoke, he's like, well, what are you certified in now? And you're like, oh, son, I've been certified in this and this and this. Not currently, because did I just suddenly forget all that?
yeah. No, and that's the tough part about it right now is like the average person has no clue. They don't care. Is the thing. It's like I tell people, what certification should I get? And I'm like, well, get whatever one it takes to get the job, because they all have faults. So, and the average person walking in, they don't know the difference in between a master's degree hanging on the wall and a weekend course you took.
Oh my God, I couldn't agree more. You know what? I just
And-
was told by one of these accrediting bodies that, in fact, I was told by a state official, people are seeking this accreditation. Parents and the students are interested. I said, no, they're not. What are
No,
you talking about?
they don't
They
care.
don't know the difference between accreditation of a university program and certification of an individual, right? One is for a university accreditation, one is for an individual. And then there's, to confuse it even more, there's program recognition, which isn't quite the same as accreditation. Or obviously there's a difference between licensure and a certification on the consumer level. So yeah, I agree with you 100%. People don't know, unless you're a specialist in the field, you don't know what's legitimate and what's not. It's very frustrating. And so the salaries stay low, right? Because nurses make big salaries because there's only X number of ways, mostly related to each other, to be a nurse or to be a dentist or what have you, or even a nutritionist. But so
and
the
it's
general
worse.
public is, they're left scratching their head. Like, are you a legitimate strength coach? And what do you mean by legitimate? Because there is no single licensing body. In some ways, that's good for the experienced people like yourself. Like, listen, I've done this for X number of years, or, there's a lot of different groups. They want to know how many years in the field do you have? Well, that matters. That should matter. So
My blinders are off more now that I'm more into the coaching at a public school level, and the lack of there's no desire by the organizations to seek out somebody that's actually professional in the field, like zero. Like they don't care who's teaching your kid how to lift. Like, as long as they think they can. Like we've talked about numerous times, it usually falls back on the head football coach. Well, you're the default strength coach, and like they flat out don't know what the hell they're doing.
Yeah, they
But
have no
these are the
education
people,
or
they have
experience right
zero
in that.
education in it, but they are handed the keys to these kids and teaching them how to use their bodies. And like, I have a meeting hopefully coming up with the whole district here, just to try to convince them that like there is one coach. Like, there's always a big fight for the sport coach within all these schools, even high school level. Like, they're all vying to hire the new head football coach or the head basketball coach or things like that, thinking this is going to fix their problems. But, my argument is there's literally one single coach that could help every single sport you have. And none of you guys hire them. None of you guys search that out. And that's a strength and conditioning coach. If you had a good strength and conditioning coach, from football to tennis, like every sport could benefit. That one coach could benefit every single sport in a positive way, from hopefully injury rates going down to athletic performance going up. And there's no push to get that coach.
Yeah. You know what? You mentioned two sides of arguments earlier. And the two sides of this, I think, one is you can't have just any schmuck in that role, right? Like, oh, I've done this for 10 years. Yeah, but you were doing it wrong all that time. Like when you see a good strength coach, you almost have to look at the portfolio of athletes they've produced, who they've trained under, that sort of all the years of experience. But that alone, the purpose of licensure, at least nominally, is to protect the public, right? And it's to protect them from bozos, whether it's nutrition or ex-phys or whatever. Certification and licensure should do that. On the flip side is, how many times have you and I both heard, you're only legitimate if you're one of us? And that's a load of shit.
Yes,
right?
that's the problem.
And that's the problem. I was told by an athletic trainer faculty once, Lonnie, you can't teach nutrition because that's an advanced topic in our field, and that means you have to be an athletic trainer. I'm like, what? Like, I have a doctorate in physiology. I have a master's in nutrition and a license to practice, and I'm not legitimate unless I'm one of you. Like, it was one of the most extreme examples I ever heard. And and so that there's two sides to it. You got to protect the public. But then, like you said, how do you find the group that you really agree with? Because they're all fighting with each other, especially like you mentioned, with massive growth in the field, which, man, we need it. We need it. But you don't want capitalism to ruin it in that it just becomes, we want to corporatize it and commercialize it. And you got to pay us your continuing education credit. You got to pay us your accreditation fees for your school. Because all of your degrees and experience don't matter unless you're in bed with us.
Exactly.
That's the problem.
That is the problem. And so how do you combat that? I don't know. I would love it if somebody figured it out. Like, in the time being, though, I'm like, screw you and your certifications. It means nothing to me. Because I have to go there. Like, literally, at this point, it's a waste of my time and money. But
yes, it is.
But it doesn't mean I don't wish that there was something there. Like, I wish for that day to come, but I don't see it happening. Because I'd love it if we had like many of the trades out there now. Like, if somebody wants to be a lineman, like, they go to school to be a lineman and hang power lines, but then they also go through an apprentice model after that. Or the doctors do the same thing.
Sure,
like,
they do. Yeah.
You go to school and then you go intern. And I wish there was that for strength and conditioning. I wish there was something set up, but there's just not, because like we've talked about on the show plenty of times, yes, 50% of strength coaching is just pure education. Opening a book and reading and getting knowledge. But at least 50% of that is just real world experience with people. And you can't fast track that. Like, there needs to be time put in and proving that you can work with people. You can't get that out of a book. So
you can't get confidence out of a book.
No,
right?
and just there's a lot of knowledge gained, like working with individuals.
No,
over years of time.
Like I said, like when you say, I'm comfortable. I'm confident getting somebody who's pre-diabetic or even has type 2 diabetes. If I work with their doctor and I'm aware of the referrals I might have to make, I can reverse that situation for them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you're confident. You're not scared if they come in and they're like, oh, I'm pre-diabetic. You don't back away because you're a 22-year-old with a certificate and no experience.
Yes.
And I'm not saying all 22-year-olds are like that, but you're like, you know what? No, I've had people like you. I know what to expect, like clinical kind of outcomes or even performance outcomes. You could only get confidence through experience, in my opinion. You can't read your way to confidence.
No.
You know?
Yeah, there's a big part of it. There just has to be, you got to get out in the field and do it. And we don't have a model currently to do that. You can seek it out. You'd have to do what I did and seek it out yourself and just have some kind of moral compass, you know, but everybody wants to just go get their certification and then hit the street running. And
we're back to capitalism then, like where everybody just wants to have a certificate. And the goal is not to unify everybody. The goal is to make money. You know, individuals, not just the big players like ACSM or NSCA or what have you, but you get individuals. And, you know, Mike and I have talked about that because he has a certification. I just think it's important that people know if you get certified in something, it doesn't make you an experienced practitioner.
Yes.
You know, and so it's good to have that knowledge and those kinds of things. But a lot of people, I mean, hundreds of certifications in the exercise field, most of them not worth the paper they're printed on. Like you said, give us a couple $100 or I don't know, what's CrossFit, like 1,000 or something.
Yeah,
like
it's a money grab. It's a weekend thing.
Yeah.
And, you know, you go to a 2-day course, you get your paper. You really can't fail it. You know, it's basically show up, pay me money, you get a piece of paper, and you're a coach.
Well, it's in their best interest, right? Not to fail people because it's about money is what it's really
and
about.
that's the problem. That is the root of the issue. It's all about money, and it's not about knowledge gained or experience. And we need an experiential model of some type, like just to like prove you can do this. Like they're not going to at the medical level. I would hope they wouldn't just let, hey, guess what? You're our ER surgeon for the weekend. You know,
Right.
I mean,
Yes.
you have no knowledge or experience in it. So
even a lot of the para health or organizations and professionals, they have, like in dietetics, you know, you might have to do X number of hundreds of hours of internship, but that's not years and years, right? And to your point, like with strength coaching is people are so individually complex, you know, in not just their moods and thoughts, but their bodies and their medical history and their family history and all their work. There's so many things. The models, and they are out there where you, like in my wife's field in mental health, you get licensed and you work for a while, but it's built in that like you get a second upgraded credential after a period of time, you know, and like you said, medical doctors or, you know, there's lots of different models, but yeah, that should be the way a lot of that stuff works. So you don't have somebody, here's your $1,000. Now and then they call themselves a strength coach, right? Because it's not legally protected. And then they can stand next to you on the same stage and give a talk. Oh, man.
Well, and then social media has muddied that even more because generally the most sought after coaches now are the ones with spend the most time on freaking Instagram and Twitter, you know? And boost themselves up. And it's like, but then at the other end of the spectrum, like most of the real strength coaches I know, like they have no post. They don't have time because they're actually doing it.
That's right.
That's right. So, a coaches meeting this weekend, and like we literally had to, like we have nothing on our social media as far as what we've done all summer. And like, man, we need to elect somebody to be our social media person because we're all too busy.
Yes, I know. It's you guys. You know, I'm a recluse, but part of the reason I'm doing that is I'm working on some big project or something, and I just don't. I can't update Facebook. Yeah. It's just I can't do it.
At the same time, that's something we need to face today. It's like it's a hard thing. Like you need to devote a part of your time to that, and like the recognition's not going to happen nowadays. Like unless you make it happen. So that's the tough part.
No, you're right. If it's growing, if there's a growing need, like we started off this segment with, then you're going to have to let people know, educate people that there's a bunch of bozos out there,
Yeah.
you know, and you're going to have to be choosy. You should look for these things in a strength coach, you know, years of experience, who they worked under, who they've produced, what kinds of outcomes they've done. And yes, education's part of that. You know, I don't want to bash book learning. That's a huge important thing, but I don't want to be told like, Lonnie, you're to be part of our group, you have to go learn your continuing education credits from someone with a third of your education.
Yeah.
And we're not going to give you credit if you go watch some, like I just saw some NASA PhDs in nutrition give a talk, and they're not pre-approved for my continuing education. So I'm like, does this create a barrier? This becomes a concern. Whereas I could go watch a talk on something that, frankly, this sounds smug, but is beneath me, and get my CEUs checked off, so long as I'm pumping money into the continuing education industry, if you will.
Well, yeah, and then the continuing education industry changed. I have taught CEUs for every organization there is. And then me and Mike were talking about this at the seminar gave in Montana. Like several of those industries have now changed. They used to, like it used to be based, who they gave CEUs to used to be based on knowledge and experience. And now a lot of them have changed it to like, we don't let anybody teach CEUs unless they're paid licensed in our organization.
That's right.
Despite that the information they're handing out is lower. You know?
Yes. That's
but
right.
It's all about the money grab. And it's like, oh, like you can't teach CEUs for ACE because you're not ACE certified anymore. It's like, oh, well, okay, see you later. I'm not doing that. I'm not going to pay you $1,000 so I can get $500.
No, that's right.
So it's
that's
like,
exactly what I mean about capitalism. You know, it's irritating to me. Late stage where everything is commoditized, and like you said, where's the old days? Sometimes I sound like an old fart, but where you were a mentee under one of the greats, and nobody would even question, really. Like, of course he knows what he's doing. He studied under so and so, and look at what he's produced. You know, and it's not as much like
that matters anymore. So
I'm glad it's growing as a field. So
so am I, and hopefully it goes in the right direction.
Right.
So.
Yeah. All right.
Okay, guys. Bunch of old curmudgeons again.
So. Some people tune in for it.
Yep. Exactly. So until next week.
We'll see you.
Iron Radio is accepting donations. If you like what we do, the professors, the scientists, the bodybuilding show promoters, the athletes themselves in powerlifting and bodybuilding, please consider making a donation or maybe buying something from the ironradio.org store. We also are accepting supporting members. So for $4 a month, which is frankly less than the bank sneaks out of your account in fees, you can step up and support a form of sort of public radio for the bodybuilding and powerlifting and strength community. The Iron Radio podcast and all of the audio on ironradio.org is for informational purposes only. If you're interested in starting a diet or exercise program, it's important to check with your physician. Also seek the help of registered dietitians, athletic trainers, and qualified exercise physiologists in order to make the progress that you need.